No, 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 no. No, no, está bien, no.
All right, all right, all right. Just a sec. Lights are blinding me slightly. Are we good to go? All right. How many of you are excited for the ESL final? Yes, we really want to appreciate all the efforts of ESL speakers here, breaking barriers and progressing in different circuits in different ways. And so we are going to be introducing the teams that are in the ESL final. For those in the Masters who complained about the lack of feminist motions, here you have it. So we are not incompetent. We are sometimes competent. All right. In opening government, all the way from Vienna, Austria, all the way from Vienna DK Wen Club, we have the team DK Wen A coming in from opening government. Let's give a big shout out to them, to Vienna A, as they come through. Fantastic taste in music. Give it up for Vienna A. All the way from the Gold Coast, the city where the gold never runs, the shores of Accra. In opening opposition, we have the team Ghana A.
This is for you and I. This is for euphoria. Give me a peace of mind. God is recording this. Won't you look in the sky? Tell them that you got the behavior of your neighbor. Even when stability's never in your favor. Fly with the turbulence. Only last a minute. Land on your dreams and recognize you live it. There's more passion for me. My passion's the money just so the world can see. My metal rules over you watching me look clean. I know. My pride, my doors, my eyes, my nose. I know. It's my control. I know I can prosper. No imposter.
Forgive my partial incompetence. This is KNUSTA from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Also, maybe as a comment to this team before the next team comes, this is the first time an African team is speaking in any WUDC final. So we're really proud of them. We're really proud of them. This is what we call breaking the barriers. So thank you so much. All right. In closing government, their arch nemesis from the University of Ghana, the shores of Accra, and the kings of Ghana, we have the team Ghana A. Where's the song?
And everybody knows the story.
Finally, representing the Balkans, the Croatians, perennial champions in this category, and former Open champions of WUDC, we have the team Zagreb C. I will now hand over the debate to the chair of the ESL final. Let's put our hands together for all the members of the panel. As chair, we have Lucy Slamova. On the panel, we have Divesh Kodnani, Emery Taylor, Juanita, Miriam, Rob, Tenku, William Price, and Davida. Yes, let's put our hands together for the panel. I will hand over the debate to the chair, Lucy.
Well, does this work? Yeah.
Yes, it
Okay,
does.
in that case, without any further ado, we'd like to welcome the Prime Minister. Here.
Okay, am I audible? Cool. Panel, 3 points in the speech. First, why this critique will be done the wrong way. Second, why this crowds out good ideas. And thirdly, why this leads to alienation of the most vulnerable. First, why this critique will be done in the wrong way. We think that people that have never grown up in the same culture don't understand inherently what this culture is about. 2 reasons for this. Firstly, you didn't grow up in the same religion. That means that you do not understand the intricacies of what happens in this kind of religion. Education material is often very, very broad because it focuses on like a very Western perspective in general, because that's what seems most important to most people. That means that other religions like Islam or like Muslim religions, specifically in Western countries, are most likely to be crowded out. That goes also the same for people in like other countries. For example, like in Syria or whatever, you wouldn't find that many materials on Christianity, for example. Most people also don't study that kind of material. That means that you don't know, like, that you don't know where to look for this kind of material. And also, you don't know which are secretly the most valuable traditions and why, meaning that you will never, like, understand what kind of critique it is. Second reason, you don't understand the values derived from this culture. If you don't grow up there, you don't understand that agency means something else to those people. Probably, like, when you grow up in Islam, you value, like, dinner with the girlies more than, like, a Western woman who probably values, like, free nipple more, right? You don't experience ever the other thing. That means you don't understand the preferences that people specifically have. You inherently care about your culture. That means that this is a valuable, like, decision that you take in order to understand this. That means that even if you have more discourse on the opposition side, the discourse will be bad. Second point, this crowds out good ideas from you as a feminist. If I'm a feminist and I critique these kind of cultural traditions, I'm most likely to be reduced to them because like I will be likely to be invited to like media discussions specifically on that topic, because media are most likely to like pick the most controversial topics, right? Because that means that you get the most clicks, that you get the most views. If people want to engage with this, people have very, very strong feelings about this. That means that you are most likely to be pushed into this kind of culture war, because that is the only space that you're given for if you want to like engage with this. That means you're not able to further like good policies that you want to stand for, because most people are also like average Joes that aren't trained to like respond to good journalists that want to push you into this kind of direction. That means it's very unlikely for you to actually further other ideas that might be in a good way. That means you reduce the capacity of yourself to like further good and basic policies, and we think that that is the most important part of what it means to be a feminist and to be in the feminist movement. You don't need to burn to be a feminist in order to improve the conditions you have like of women and gender minorities around the globe. If you don't manage to like to like focus on that, because you will be pushed into this kind of war. The third point, and probably the most important point, is alienation. Specifically of the people who are like in this group of people, like that you critique. Because like these people are most likely to hate you for 3 reasons. Firstly, the audacity. This doesn't rely on you actually doing like bad critique, because you inherently don't come from within. That means that the people that you critique also know that you do not share the same experiences and the same struggles as they do. It means that you're likely to be like met with like a side eye, because you don't want to believe that people who don't understand where you came from actually like can do valuable critique. That means you're most likely to be rejected. But also you're inherently critiquing something very, very like sensitive, which is their identity. your identity as a religious person is the most proximate to you, because that means if you go to hell or go to heaven. That is extremely important to you. You're likely to shape your culture. You're likely to shape your worldview around this. That means that it's also super problematic if you critique this and if you do it in the slightest way that could be offensive, because you will be immediately rejected. But secondly, it also makes things worse in order for you to make sure that people can actually get out of this kind of religion, right? If you want to leave this religion, it is now harder, because you will be because as a person who's in this religion, you will be restricted in your engagement with the feminist movement, right? This is for two reasons. Firstly, internal. I will never reach out to the feminist movement if they inherently only critique my religion or the other things I like and the things I stand for. I don't engage with it as a whole. That means that I will never find tendencies, I will never find programs in myself, because I associate the feminist movement inherently with the critique of my religion and not with something else. But the second part of this is the external problem. Your family is also less likely to let you engage, because they do not like the critique of the feminist movement that is given to you. This is because you fear cultural eradication. Especially if you grow up in a country where your religion isn't the dominant religion, you're most likely to grasp and cling on to your culture, and view every attack on you, or they could be viewed as an attack, as something inherently terribly bad, and won't let your child engage with this. Before I go to impact, closing.
As we have record attacks on acid attacks on women, can the feminist movement really call itself feminist as an advocate of women's voices when they don't use their millions of funds to help them in their situation?
I don't think that the acid attacks of women are reliant on a period of divorce after the death of a husband or that kind of thing. That is not what we're talking about, right? But also, these attacks actually get exacerbated by this kind of thing, because these kind of things are likely to protect women the most. If I can actually engage with my friends in prayer, if I can actually still meet women because I'm allowed to wear a veil, that means that I'm also more likely to gather around with these kind of women and protect myself from this. It is far more likely that if the feminist movement critiques this, women get even more oppressed and get even more cracked down on opposition side, because the religion is more likely to be afraid of the feminist movement. The impact of this is, firstly, that you cannot protect people as much anymore, because they don't have an opportunity to actually opt out of the religion if they wish to do so. That means that you cannot protect the most vulnerable. You're more likely to get these kind of crackdowns in the status quo. You're likely to get bad critique, which leads to a worse engagement with the feminist movement. And as a feminist, you're likely to be pushed into a culture war, which means that you get worse engagement with the feminist movement on all scales. Proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for a fantastic speech. I'd like to welcome the leader of the opposition.
So before I start, I'd like to say a few words. Like was said, this is the first time there's an African country, there's an African institution in the ESL final of the WUDC, and there's been a lot of people who have been extremely helpful. Our institution has been extremely helpful with all the support that they've given us. But this speech is particularly dedicated to the future of the debate society, of the KNH debate society, and all the ways we're going to create in the future. And 3 or 4 years' time, they'll look at this video and say, oh, there was a time where ESL Final was such a big deal for the KNH debate society. I hope that time is very soon. So I'm going to be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. All institutions that exist within society are supposed to be representative. There is no institution that should deny the ability of women to get into positions of power. And at any point where that's reflecting in any institution, i.e. religion or any other part of society, it is imperative, it is principally justified that those things are called out by all members of society. And that's the case we're going to bring to you from open opposition. Firstly, some engagement to open government. They say, well, people will hate you because it makes you look like you have huge audacity to question these things. First response, this is largely symmetric because on both sides, even if you are belonging to this religion, you will still be attacking core traditions that exist within this religion. Secondly, would rather prefer a world where you draw people's attention to the fact that they are being oppressed and there's a chance they can recognize it and push for those change, as opposed to when they're continuously being oppressed, right, without their knowledge about it. Because I'm going to be proving extensively the way in which people who exist in religion are socialized and why they are oblivious to the oppression that they suffer in their status quo. Second thing opening government analyzes is that, well, these guys do not understand the intricacies of these things, and that means that they are unable to engage in advocacy properly. Like, the examples of these oppressions are clear. I don't think you need an encyclopedia to understand that women are continuously oppressed in religion and they are not continuously allowed to be represented. I don't think opening government has a case within today's debate. So let's move on to frame. Note that most religions face most of these problems, right? Most religions do not allow for women to be represented, right? And the people that engage in advocacy or the people that can be able to call out these things are actually not engaged in religion because of structural reasons I'm going to analyze. The people who can most likely do this are people who are not part of these institutions, i.e. people who are not part of religion, people who do not belong to religion, or people who are atheists. So the first argument I'm going to be making in that regard is why feminists belonging to the church or religious institutions do not have the capacity and incentive to engage in this form of advocacy. I have a lot of structural reasons in that regard. Number one, the identity and community ties that they are unable to betray. Because you know that most of these guys have emotional and family attachment to these places. That means that it is extremely difficult to call out these things. And most of these guys look up to those people, they see them as their idols and role models. That means that they are able to call out these problems when they see them. Secondly, most of these guys rely on these religious institutions for economic opportunity and availability of those economic opportunities. That means that, once again, they are able to call out these institutions because they literally rely on them for food stamps, for shelter, and things like that, especially in most developing countries. Thirdly, these guys are socialized to overlook all the negative problems and all the bad things that exist within this religion because they say, oh, well, you need to do this if you want to go to heaven. That means that they are forced to overlook these problems, they are oblivious to these problems, even though they continuously suffer these problems, and that's why there's a need for us to call it out. Why is this characterization very important within today's debate? That means that for feminists within these religious institutions to call out these negativities, they would have to then trade off their inherent identity. That means that it is very difficult for these guys to call out these things. That means that there's a need for the larger and the broader feminist movement to step on their behalf. But secondly, most of these guys are unable to sacrifice the benefits that they receive from the church because it is crucial to their actualization as individuals that exist within society because there are lack of opportunities that exist. These guys literally rely on churches for food as is prevalent in Africa and most developing countries. Right? Why is our comparative better? Because feminists who are not part of these religious institutions do not rely on these religious institutions for any benefit. That means that they have no incentive to show that the religious institutions, they are able to properly call them out. But I'm going to do extensive analysis for this. Why is it that feminists outside the church have more capacity to engage in this? I'm going to analyze this on 3 levels. Number one, their incentive to capacity and the kind of messaging that's portrays. On incentive, number one, note that these guys or feminists outside the religious institutions face the spillover effect from the patriarchy, right? Why do we know this is true? Because if you are a feminist within the religious institution and you are still shackled by this oppression, you still believe that, oh well, women need to be subservient to men. You are able to then vote on policies. You are able to then engage in social discourse and conversations that are crucial to the actualization and emancipation of women. But second incentive is that most feminists become feminists because they don't want to see the kind of oppression that exists within society. They want to see the world become a better place. They generally don't want to see the kind of shitty things, the shitty ways that women are treated within these churches. That means that they have an incentive to intervene. But note that the general connotation of social justice movements require that anytime you see injustice, you are supposed to call them out. Secondly, why do they have the capacity? First of all, feminists outside religious institutions are not scared of going to hell. That means that they can literally call out the Pope, they can literally call out all the heads of these religious institutions. Secondly, you get very little advantages from these communities. That means that you have no incentive to show them you can actively call them out. But thirdly, they are not limited by these socializations. They don't face any gender crisis or they don't go through any cognitive dissonance where they have to choose between the church and their feminist identities. That means that they can go all out and call these guys. Why? How
how is the messaging like, and why is it a good thing? Firstly, within the church, note that the comparative allows us to incorporate feminists within the church into the fold. That means that on our side, we can have both sides, feminists within the church and feminists outside the church, engaging this advocacy. Why is it a good thing? One, it signals support and backing, right? Because feminists within the church feel that the larger feminist movement is for us. And that means that they have more incentive, they have more backing, and they are able to then engage in this advocacy. Secondly, this serves as a reality check for feminists inside these religious institutions anytime they are backsliding and are forced to choose between their identities because they know the larger feminist movement is supporting them. Before I move on, I'll take closing.
So, for this debate to work in your world, you equally need to have feminists in these religious organizations who want change to happen. How do you change in your world?
Yeah, so if that characterization is true that feminists are very little in the church, then on their side, then there's no change at all, right? And that's a comparative they need to engage. But then to outsiders, what does the messaging look like? Because note that most people see feminists in religious institutions as individuals who are traitors, as people who enforce the patriarchal narrative that exists within society. So at a point where feminists outside these religious institutions call out these religious institutions, then the larger majority of society is more likely to bank on these things and be able to achieve the change that we want, right? But know that on our side, these issues are made more apparent because of the simple reason that more feminists are engaging in this as opposed to the other side where there are little feminists engaging in this. What are the broader impacts? Note that on our side, we have more mobilization. Why? Because number one, there's more relatability because people can see everyone suffering because there are more people engaging, more feminists engaging in this. Number two, there's a bandwagoning effect because all feminists are talking about these issues as opposed to the other side where these issues are talked about exclusively by certain feminists who certain feminists see as traitors to the feminist movement. Why is this impact important? Because you have more numbers that can influence voting, change, policy making, etc. But lastly, how to preemptively weigh the idea of backlash. Note that they say these guys should get backlash. On their side, there's no change at all because nobody is talking about these things. On our side, even if we get some backlash, we have discourse. These issues are made more apparent and this can lead to potential change. On their side, there's no change at all. That's why OO clearly takes today's debate.
Thank the leader of a great speech, and I would like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
I feel more powerful this way anyway. Before I start, this is the first time Vienna has reached any World's final. But there were a lot of people who achieved incredible success before that, so to all of our fellow Vienna people, thank you so much for being here coaching us. Thank you. Ready? All right. 3, 2, 1. I find it problematic that a team can stand up and say these things are inherently oppressive without asking the person whether they find them oppressive. I like to wear a lot of makeup, I like to wear very femme clothes, and people sometimes do come up to me and say, oh, you're catering to the male gaze, aren't you? But the truth is, I like to look this way. And this is something that actually enhances agency. When we let people who belong to a certain group, whether it is makeup wearing women or whether it is hijab wearing women, make the rules on how they wear their hijab and in what situations. I think this is the first problem of opposition side. I'm going to go into a bit of rebuilding. First, on the resources. Note that a lot of times feminist views, or even if they're not labeled feminist, a lot of like girl prayer groups, women prayer groups exist in a lot of cases where they do talk about what it is that their relationship with God means in their life and what these policies mean in their lives. I think it's more likely that they're going to want to reach out to any kind of feminist or progressive organization at the point where they don't feel like they need to justify their existence and the way they look and what they're doing on a daily basis to them. Meaning that if you want more resources from progressive sources, you're only going to get them if they actually want to reach out to them. The second thing is, they just assume that the critique is going to be good critique. That doesn't engage at all with Paulo's 4 points on why this is going to be bad critique. But not necessarily. Even if the critique is going to be okay, at the point where an increase of critique from non-religious women towards religious women means that the agency of these religious women is decreased, it's just not worth it. What gain do I have as an atheist woman of going up to a hijabi and saying, this is oppressive? I don't see what the game here is for me, especially because I'm probably also not going to be the one who's going to be invited by the imam to hear my opinion about the hijab. If it's going to be anyone who's going to be invited to the imam, it's going to be a very good Muslim woman who has studied the Quran dutifully and has good opinions on how the narrative of the Quran actually maybe tells me things about women that I didn't hear before. It's not gonna be woke people that are gonna do that. Now, the other question is, does this critique happen on our side of the house? I think an important thing to understand is that, as we said, these women exist in churches. They exist, The delta here is whether they're pushed in the defense of their policies rather than being able to shape these policies. Meaning, if the church is under attack, or these women feel under attack of fellow other women because they're wearing the hijab, or because they're fasting in a certain way, etc., they're going to go, when they go together, they're going to talk about, oh, yeah, I was spat on by a woman, or I was ridiculed for my hijab in school, and the dialogues and narratives that they're going to push with each other are, there's no one out there who actually accepts us as we are and believes that I like the way I am and I want to be the way I am. Note that this doesn't only increase the pain that these people feel on a daily basis because they feel they're not accepted in society, if a lot of people do this, but secondly, it also means that they go into a more defensive position of who they are because they couldn't establish their identity to begin with. Note, if you don't feel secure in yourself, you're not going to be able to change yourself in a way where you can actually look at further options. Meaning that this is extremely harmful to actually opening up to anything else in the long way. The third thing is, probably going to critique these things in a much more correct and inclusive way. Note that there's loads of things to interpret in all dogmatic literature in many kinds of ways, where, for example, violence against women in the Quran is seen as one of the most atrocious things you can do, and there's loads of things that protect women from it, and it means that you have actually a lot of leverage as a woman to explain that separate praying spaces are actually really good for safety. Just think about it. You are literally bowing and your butt is going in the air. If there's men there and they watch you, it's probably going to be uncomfortable to be watched in that way. This means that only they understand whether this is actually a problem for them or not a problem for them. If a feminist says, no, we need gender-neutral mosques, it is probably very alienated for what the problem for the people within these communities actually is. Then, I want to continue with impacting the point about being pushed into a culture war. Austria has banned full veils. This has led to a few things. One, the legitimization of racist tendencies of people because they feel now, this is an oppressive thing. This means these are uncultured people, meaning that their religion as a whole is uncultured. But what has it actually meant for women? It's meant two things. One, Muslim people who wear a veil pay more fines because they're still going to wear the veil, even though it might be banned, but they're just going to have less money, which means that they're going to have less money for their families. The second thing is, women are just going to stay at home more and not engage with society because they don't want to pay these fines. Before I continue, closing.
Is it more likely that this critique is going to tell women you are not allowed to wear a veil, or is it more likely that it's going to tell the patriarchal figures that you're not allow women to force upon them that they have to wear a veil?
Yeah, but the thing is, the imam is not going to listen to you. You can tell him you shouldn't force it on them. But the thing is, most religions don't force women to wear veils anyway, I think it's a very Western-centric narrative that we see it as like implicitly forced upon them when it is a part of our culture. No one forced me to wear makeup, wear heels and a dress. Yes, there's probably narratives that make me do this more than others, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't free choice. But if we talk about agency, note that this is probably the most common denominator because it's an action of choice. If religion is a tightening of option because you need to fast, pray, etc., which is their framing, opening up options in the future is the only way you can guarantee that you can actually make meaningful choices. Meaning that if I have established my personality as a hijabi, only when I have established that and realized that there are other options out there and I engage with them and I'm not afraid of them, then maybe one day I will say I don't want to wear the hijab anymore. But as long as this is demonized and not accepted, there will be never enough agency for these people. For all these reasons, vote OG.
Thank the DPM for a great speech. We'd like to welcome the DLO. Here.
Hello everyone, my name is Prosper Michael. You probably never forget this after the speech. So this speech is dedicated to a lot of people I cannot mention, but for whoever has given a word of advice, whoever has given a word of affirmation to what my team has to offer, we say thank you, and we are going to do our best to make sure that this comes home. Oppression, at its most effective, is not only done structurally, it is done psychologically, done in a manner which makes the oppressed acknowledge and accept the oppression as a norm and something they need to subscribe to. It happens typically when you actively lock out onlookers and objective actors from being able to point out that oppression is being perpetuated in a particular space. The thing that exists in many religious spaces is that privileges and responsibilities are given on the back of gender, and they are usually compelled, and they make individuals who are per virtue of a particular gender compulsorily subscribe to these things. This in itself, this compulsion, is the tipping point at which this debate happens, because we think that to the very extent where many of these women do not choose, like OG tries to argue to you, it means that there is little availability of choice and little availability of actualization in many of these spaces, and that's why this is bad. But beyond that, our case is very simple. Our case says, if you allow external individuals to critique your religion and the tenets of it, what you have is better discourse. So if indeed what you are doing is not wrong, you'll be able to defend yourself, and that's fine. But if indeed what you are doing is bad and oppressive to certain groups of people, you have a higher probability and a higher propensity to shine light upon it and have a better level of engagement. Just with this, we have won the debate. But let's directly engage with OG in today's debate, because their case is very simple. They say people do not understand the culture and intricacies of this religion and the value of it, so their critiques are going to probably be bad. First, like, push back against that. If their critiques are bad, it means most probably the response to them is going to point out how bad these critiques are. It means that you'll be able to defend yourself successfully, and you'll be able to prove necessarily that this in of itself is something that is not particularly problematic. But secondly, the reason why there is a difficulty to understand the intricacies of your religion is because you don't fucking allow us to discuss about it. That is the problem that inherently exists. When you create a higher level of discourse, you create take a removal of that veil that exists between religious clerics and their tenets that they particularly establish and the real thing that goes on the grounds, and everybody is probably going to be a tad less Islamophobic in that regard. But secondly, their case is that women would not opt for feminism, and this is the biggest part of their case. They say women will not opt for feminism when feminism starts to come after their religion. We think in that same vein, it means that in their world, there are no feminists at all. So if indeed these things are objectively bad, like I proved to you in my intro, there will be no change, no delta in their world. But secondly, it means that we think that the chances are these women probably already do not subscribe to feminism in their world, so there is really no delta in that regard. We probably should not even be having this debate. But why do we think there's actually a higher propensity to have a higher level of opting into feminism in our world? We think that the most radical individuals that exist in these religions are usually silenced, usually told that what they have are alternative viewpoints that nobody would subscribe to. When the feminist movement jumps into their rescue, you have a higher level of opt-in that regard because they found a place to call home when nobody tells them that they are wrong for saying that they shouldn't be praying at the back of the mosque and they deserve to equally mingle with the people in the front row. But the thing that they say is that women largely choose these things. They largely choose to opt into wearing hijabs, etc., etc. Two observations. One, if they do choose, then there is no pushback from our side because we endorse choice. We say at the point where it is compulsory and you cannot choose, then it becomes particularly problematic in that regard, and we say that's bad. But secondly, we think that largely women actually do not choose. Women are being lashed for not wearing hijabs in places like in places in the Middle East. We think women have acid being poured upon them because they do not subscribe to the religion tenets that has been compelled upon them. We think that inability of women to make choices is the reason why we say let external actors be able to engage in that regard. But beyond that, we think that religious women want to opt into feminism because one, massive discourse means you question these beliefs and you will eventually find them problematic if indeed they are problematic. But secondly, they want to join the feminist movement in of itself, but they aren't able to do so, and that's why there are little numbers particularly do so, and they even want to critique, but there are little numbers to critique. But I'll do two more things before I end my speech. First, I'm going to argue the state power principle that Zagreb probably wants to argue because that's their only inheritance from Tin. Shout out to Piotr. But secondly, I'll show you what the counterfactual looks like. Let's start with the counterfactual. We think that more often than not, when individuals who do not subscribe to this compulsion try to seek redress, they do it in a particular manner. They do it with call-in culture, not call-out culture. Why? Because this is a more reasonable way for them to maintain their identity without bastardizing it to external individuals. Why is this inherently problematic? One, because it means that the power dynamics that would exist in those discussions are largely going to be tipped to favor the oppressor and individuals that compel you to act in a particular manner. When it's a call-out culture, you have a higher level of individuals equally helping you, egging you on, giving you all the necessary amount of validation you need to continue in that direction. That is good. But secondly, we think that the reason why calling culture is largely problematic is because it gives many of these religious clerics an opportunity to hide in their echo chambers and continue perpetuating the evil that they do without having anybody pontificate at them and show that what they are doing is bad. We think that's inherently wrong. But the second thing, we think that inherently, this is a state power principle. Inherently, social groupings are the most pervasive and powerful elements of society. They are so powerful that they create norms that are near impossible to break down. These norms maintain relevance through three things. One, decades of practice, because they've been doing it since before you were born. Two, seemingly minute trade-offs demanded. We're not asking you to do anything big. We're just saying, go to the back. But this actually affects how you see yourself as someone who should always be behind men. But thirdly, they perpetually silence external actors from being able to call out these bad practices. Why is this particularly something that we need to hedge against? We think that the reason why many of these religious entities were created was to maximize autonomy of individuals and their ability to be happy. To the extent where they do not do that, we think it is necessary for individuals to voice out in that regard, to take back the power they've ceded to these social groupings. We think that to the extent where there are external factors that make that impossible, it is imperative that objective individuals give them the validation that they need so we have a higher level of mobilization, higher level of discourse, and higher level of change in that regard. It's finally time to have an African team win the championship. That happens today, that happens now.
Thank you, dear Lord, for a great speech. We'd like to welcome the member of government. Here, here.
Hi, yeah, I'm audible. Before I also begin my speech, I would have to say a very special thank you to my mom, because if not for her, I wouldn't be here genuinely. In as much as she does think debate may take away from my studies, she still let me be here. And to Honorable Okoboy, and to my uncle, my cousins who have also supported me in coming this far, thank you so much. And yeah, glory be to God. Since I can see you, just put up your hand for PY. Okay, beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. So panel, inherently at certain points in my case, you see why we are better than our opening, but I'll still do some weighing up within my case. So we think this debate engages two types of women. Is that one, some of these women know the oppression that exists and it's actually a choice of their own part. I'll engage how we better interact with these women. Secondly, yes, we bite the bullets, unlike our opening, to engage in a world where, yes, they have been indoctrinated so bad that we need to actually engage them on some level. We show you how we still have a better utility than the entire government. So on the first part, the first women who it's a choice for them, we think insofar as feminism argues things like bodily autonomy, and that you can choose whatever you do in any instance or any world where you do critique something that is a choice, it is principally against the major ideology on which this feminism entirely runs. That is a threat to your own ideology, a painting of a picture that you don't know what you yourself are about, something that is bad for the feminist movement in itself. But then secondly, it is also to say, for example, that I'm fine with women doing whatever they want within status quo, but it is at slut shaming I draw the line, especially when it's a choice of autonomy within these spaces. We don't think you are able to engage with these people. Best case scenario, you segregate them. Worst case scenario, you segregate them. Best case scenario, you ignore them within the feminist movement. That is inherently bad. But then, like I've already shown you, let's engage what actually happens within status quo, because we think that is where OG falls out, because they lack mechanism as to how status quo responds to these ideologies. Is that the reaction of these conservative spaces, first of all, to liberal, different ideologies, it's like one saying that it is very alien, or it is weird, or it's just not good because it is different. So, for example, they say it's something external, or something that is not applicable to our religion, because we have external people leading these kind of ideologies and pushing these kind of ideologies within status quo. So, for example, queer people in Africa use literature, use pictures within status quo to show the fact that they support this ideology, in as much as they may not be able to represent it themselves. But here's the difference between their side, is that in as much as that happens, the fact that you are posting 10,000 people in the US celebrating Pride Month, in Nigeria, nobody gives a damn, because that's thousands of miles away from us. We don't really care whether they have that liberation, and you don't within status quo. We think comparatively, what happens on their side of the world is that the spaces that you are expecting to create those changes only push back, and they don't really care what happens within status quo. We think that is very bad. But then secondly, is how, like they say, there's a creation of echo chambers within spaces. So the women that they are trying to reach are actually becoming more inaccessible in their world, because the leaders of these religions tell you that it is devilish to read and to engage with these particular ideologies, because it is so foreign and it's so bad. There's a constant pushback from those religious leaders to resist any form of socialization of their members. So if you say that they have been indoctrinated so bad, in your world have little to no access to them, because their leaders are still going to tell them that it is bad. For example, Christianity, my religion, says don't engage among the scornful people because you would be polluted. Inherently telling me that if anything is bad in my religion, I shouldn't even want to talk to you about it within status quo. We think you don't get it. But then what then happens is that what happens externally, and why it is bad, is that most of these external factors and leaders or people that they advocate for use the most popular proponents of the religion to engage with the religion. And here's the mechanism as to how we achieve a better outcome on our side of the world, is that in a world where you advocate that we need to change proponents of this religion to actually enjoy, to allow liberation among these women and among these people, we tell you that the reanalysis of the dogma, which is inherently the source of all these like quote and unquote oppressive ideologies, and the re-explanation can only come from a place that is internal within this religion in itself. Why? Because it is at this level that the discussions on change, or like the discussions on this dogma, actually exist within status quo. We think you cannot have that when you have no engagement or no entry point to those levels at which the discussions actually happen within status quo. What we then do is to create that incentive for engagement. Now, what way you don't buy that, this is how it actually happens, is that these religions in and of themselves are equally trying to gain power within status quo. What then happens when you have that internal factor pushing that change is that it leads to a threat of divorce within these religions. So the fact that yes, it's a Christian sect or it's a Christianity which caters for women, what then happens is you have a far different sect or a separation of the entire Christian identity within these spaces because they need to also advocate for these women or need to protect these women. That division inherently is something that these religious leaders cannot afford because one, these women provide a utility in terms of funding. They also equally fund these religions. Secondly, in terms of voting power, they also are part of the reasons why you will have a certain decision flowing within these regions. What we then do is to create an internal incentive for them to actually create the change that they want on their side of the wall. We do better than our opinion on the mechanism as to how we actually get the change. But then secondly, on incentive, they say, you know what, these people are so indoctrinated that they don't want to engage. We think this debate happens in a world where the feminist movement is actually powerful to actually engage because things like the legal social world of things have been catered for. We think that one, then the only way an external help can then be realized is when a group of people internally, even if small, wants this change. That is the only way you have the legitimacy to advocate for people. So for example, take the WUDC. No matter whether you create a quota system for black people, if no African country or no African school wants to be here, that quota system is useless. You don't have any legitimacy for that to actually happen within status quo. In our world, as long as there's one person who wants to be on this stage like we are, we have a legitimacy, we fight for them. So they can't just say, well, people don't really buy into it and so it won't happen. That is just not true. Okay.
Yeah, so there is already a massive level of brainwashing and indoctrination that happens in states.
Yeah, I'll get to that.
No delta, because you establish no
so, panel, just picture this. A world where your religion tells you that because it is external, it is devilish. And you having someone within your religion telling you that, well, it's not so devilish because I believe in the religion, all right, but I advocate for this change. In which one are you more likely to believe in the kind of oppression that is true and the liberation you need? It's our world because it is someone who is experiencing it equally as you are within status quo. Just the level of believability is better on our side of the world. Now, the final and even most important thing is how within status quo, there are minorities among minorities, even in the feminist movement in itself. So what then happens is that in as much as we think we are all women, the transgender people are often sidelined. Other people are often sidelined. In a world where you create a world where the external people who are not part of a particular sect of us cannot advocate for us, the only way they get buy-in from us is in a world where we have that representation on that level. So the only way you can engage in those religious conversations, or the only way you can advocate for that particular group of people, which is the inherent ideology and purpose of this feminist movement, is when you have a person of that group represented in those spaces. We think this representation is very important because at the end of the day, we do not want minorities among a movement that it is inherently for all minorities. We are very proud to win from closing governments. Thank you.
Thank you, member for my speech. I would like to welcome the member of opposition.
Am I audible? I would like to thank all of the Zagreb people for supporting us so loudly and so animalistically. The true Balkan savages, all of you who feel identified by that, thank you for showing this extreme support and thank you for helping us out when we really needed it. For Zagreb to be in this final again, for Zagreb to be on the world stage in a way that was only made possible in the last few years by amazing people such as THBT, who is here today with us. It's really an amazing feeling and I'm extremely proud to be here. Without further ado, let's do some debating. Okay. I can agree with OG that burqas aren't inherently problematic. I can agree with OG that having separate prayer rooms isn't inherently problematic. What I cannot agree with OG is that the critiques are going to be saying, oh, you can't wear a burqa because a burqa is evil. The critiques say the consequences of not wearing a burqa are problematic. What is the problem that exists that the feminist movement's critique is the enforcement of these rules, the forceful enforcement and the punishments thereof, right? The problem is not wearing a burqa in the West. The feminist movement has never tried to advocate that you can't wear a burqa in Vienna. This is not the feminist movement. Marina says, oh, but it's banned in Vienna. It's banned in Vienna because of the right-wing xenophobic movement, not because of feminist advocacy. Feminist advocacy always has been saying that women should be able to wear what they want, but not what is enforced on them by a patriarchy. Not when the punishment for not wearing something is getting stoned, is getting acid thrown in your face, is getting hands chopped off. This is what's problematic, and this is what is advocated against within the motion, right? We don't criticize nuns for having different clothing than priests, because they are not forced to do this, they're not punished if they don't, right? This is the notable exception. No, that opening government, and I love you guys, they're so fun, they say, we did think about running the state power principle, but the first point of the state power principle says, there is an inherent and asymmetric and irrectifiable asymmetry of power between the state and the individual. I've read this like a million times. To show why this is same for the social movement, you have to show why the social movement has an asymmetric and irrectifiable asymmetry of power over an individual. We are going to actually show this. This is an extremely important missing link. Note, women who are in these religious contexts, women who exist in the East, women who exist under patriarchal, theocratic rule, do not have the ability to advocate for this. I don't even care if you agree with me that they do want to or they don't want to, right? They don't have the ability to, regardless of their wants. What does this mean? They are in physical danger if they try to step up. Look at what happened in Iran. Look at what the morality police did, killing women on the streets for not wearing the burqa properly, right? They have economic dependency on the patriarchs in their lives. They have economic dependency on their husbands. If he kicks you out of the street, not only are you going to suffer the noose of the state, which is fundamentally inescapable, but also you're unable to have your own economic dependency to go somewhere else to pay for your own life. And thirdly, and very importantly, there is learned helplessness that exists, right? If you try to do something and you fail, and you fail, and you fail, you stop trying. This is why Bulgarians don't go to elections anymore. You just believe that it's not even possible. No. But learned helplessness is a tangible problem that exists, right? They don't want to try anymore because of all the reasons stated before. Why do women in the West actually do have the power to have tangible change? One, they have information dissemination networks. What does this mean? They have journalists, they have blogs, they have ways to reach out to women and say, look, this is what's happening to you, this is what could be happening to you. This is how you can improve your life. These are the small things you can do. Secondarily, they have money to pay for infrastructure, to pay for women to go to places that are going to help them, that are going to make them feel safe, that are going to give them a place where they can say, look, this is what I suffered, this is why I do not feel at home. No. This is not basic identity because it is instilled by fear. OG cannot say, oh, but this is basic identity and we should all bow down to basic identity because somebody said this is basic identity. You cannot claim that these women have the ability to actually tangibly prove to me that this is their basic identity at the point where a patriarchy has a gun to their head saying if you don't say this is your basic identity, you will suffer consequences. This is what is problematic because we cannot be sure that something is accepted in good faith if there are tangible consequences for not accepting it. I can put a gun to Dick Pulich's head and say drink this rakia. He probably would have done it either way, but I can't be sure if I'm threatening him for doing it, I'm threatening him tangible consequences if he does not. This is why societal pressure is extremely problematic. This is why the patriarchal regime is extremely problematic there. This is why the patriarchal regime implies fundamental differences in worth that are internalized in women. But furthermore, the tangible impacts that exist of this motion and why they're so intangibly important, this also responds extremely well to closing government. Okay. The tangible impacts are likely loosening religious norms on women. Meaning loosening religious norms on women probably means giving women more agency, probably means giving them more ability to pursue their own happiness, more ability to find their own definition of happiness. Note, they can still wear burqas afterwards. If we do achieve leniency on enforcement of religious rules, that does not mean that they cannot access their identity and still wear burqas afterwards, but it means that those who do not identify with wearing burqas do not have to anymore. This is extremely important. How is this achieved? A couple of minutes before the Marina.
If I'm so oppressed and brainwashed, I'm probably not going to change. Only way is if some of my Muslim sisters who who are not so extreme but moderate in other parts of the world just as well critique us.
It is unclear why your other Muslim sisters are going to critique you, why they're going to critique you well, and why you're going to buy into this. We give you tangible mechanisms why the West has more ways to do this. Now, note, why is this also tangibly problematic? Well, you can press religious leaders. How does this look like? How does pressing religious leaders look like? One, this is often through attrition. This means that the feminist movement critique the way that you do things, the way that you enforce something, the way that you punish women for not following certain societal norms. And if you do this, press conference after press conference, right, mass after mass, right, if you do this consistently on consistent media, at some point they have to answer. At some point it becomes too much. At some point you budge. This is what happens to the Pope when he says, look, gay is fine. The Bible isn't explicitly saying that gay is bad. Because we attritioned him into doing this. The 4 girls before him may not have wanted to, but the 5th one has to. Because the questions just kept on coming and you couldn't get through your day without it. Secondarily, the movement in Iran is an extremely important social context for this. I don't know why it hasn't been talked about. Note that in the East, religious power is tied to the power over the state. This means that you probably want to protect your authority and you probably want to protect your religious integrity. To that extent, at the point where you see what happened in Iran, at the point where you see that the feminist movement can take traction, that burqas can be taken off, that women can show up in Iran without wearing their burqas, and they can go about their day, and there is no morality police that is going to stop them en masse. At that point, you become worried, because if you lose your religious integrity, you lose even more than that. You lose your political power over the country. And that is why religious leaders at this specific point in time are like, you buy into this narrative. Because they say, look at what they did there. I don't want this to happen to me. I'd gladly give them a bit more leniency. I'd rather give them a hand so they don't take a fist. This is extremely important. And lastly, this can be framed for a religious context. Note that religious feminism can exist and it can co-opt this message. Note that if you want to reframe the Quran for religious messaging, you can very much do so. You can claim that Muhammad's wife is the original founder of Islam. You can claim that it wouldn't have been for her because when he saw the angel Gabriel, he did not believe it was real. It was she who convinced him. This is how you frame the importance of women, how you reframe it to be extremely important when it is made, and why women should be respected in these countries to make religious leaders actually buy into this. For all of these reasons, proud to oppose.
Thank you, Member of for fine speech. Welcome, Government Whip. Here.
So I'm going to do some shout outs. Can't find my button. Anyway, so yeah. First to African teams to be in the final. Congratulations to OO, congratulations to us. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to everybody in the Ghanaian community. The support has been immense. From seniors from my union to people, even from their union, who have supported us. It's been amazing. And finally, I just want to say that it's been a crazy couple of 2 months for my team, because initially we were going to come here with like 3 other teams, but our school pulled funding all of a sudden, and we literally had to race against time to be here. I'm really grateful for everyone that helped and everyone that supported. Okay, so I'm going to go on and start the debate. Okay, so this debate happens in 2 folds, as only CD tells you. We tell you that there are people that have probably consented to this. They know the issues that exist and they want to be in these religions anyway. Or 2, people that do not know what is going on. I think the biggest problem with the entire opposition bench is that they are not engaging the nuance of this debate. This debate does not say that you are not allowed to preach the general ideologies of feminism to people across the world. What this debate says is that you can't criticize specific issues in specific religions that you do not belong to. What this then means is that body autonomy, you need to stand up against the patriarchy, can all exist in their world without those specific examples. So people could still have some amount of knowledge about feminism and the ideologies of feminism and can choose to apply these things in their lives individually without you having to be the one that criticizes these things from your end, especially based on the problems that we've shown you. They don't explain what the tipping point is and white feminist movement need to move away from preaching general ideologies and have to engage with the specific nuances that is being spoken about in this particular debate. What that then means is that based on the substantive cases that we get for both OO and CO, I'm not sure why we are having a debate, because I'm not sure why there's a specific need for those particular examples and those particular issues. This is why Crossing Government wins. The best response so far, besides what we've said so far, right? So moving on to what we have against OO. OO does a lot of framing in this particular debate that makes our case even more sensible. They say that these particular people are going to push back for a couple of reasons. They have created identity and have community ties with these individuals. We think that that's exactly the reason why our case makes sense. Because if there's a community identity, what that then means is that the pushback is less likely to be bad. Because I am more capable of telling my mom that my sister shouldn't be the one washing the dishes and there should be no gender roles at home than somebody on the TV that my mom doesn't know telling her the same thing. Because at the end of the day, what's the worst that they could do to me? They can't, my mom can't just decide to throw me out of the house because I have liberal ideologies. Same way, if these particular people are so close-knit and are friends with everybody in the church, maybe a couple of people are going to say bad things about you behind your back, but they're not going to sack you from the church, right? So exactly the reason why the pushback is much less on our end, and there's a huge possibility for us to create change. But moving on, they also argue a couple of things. They say, these people are not ready to trade their identity. I think the biggest problem in this debate is that these people say social movements are brave. They are people that are going to push, and they have to push. All of a sudden, when it gets to a particular part of that same social movement, they are not brave, they are not capable of pushing. I think what we need to recognize is that danger exists for all social movements. Feminists are always going to face danger. The only way change happens is if we push people to the wall, and even if that means we are going to lose our lives or we are going to die, that is the only way we get the change. Because recognize, even if you don't believe me, at the end of their case, they are still going to need people in these particular religions who have now become feminists to do things like boycott church services, end up being breaking down the separation of worship places. So at the end of the day, danger will still happen in your head. These people are still going to have to stand up for themselves. So you can't just argue that because these people are going to stand up for themselves, there's no possibility for them to stand up for themselves. Standing up for themselves is the only way change actually happens. But then recognize, all the teams in this debate keep on saying we are going to create discourse. I am not sure how OO or CO's discourse leads to the imam or the priest changing their mind. It is just a conversation about discourse, and I'm going to tell you why that particular discourse in and of itself is something that is false, right? They say all these people have capacity, funding, they have a lot of power. Well, you don't need to be a black person to fund a black cause. You can equally fund it if you think it's a cause that is worthy to you. I'm not quite sure why you need to be talking about those particular specific issues to be the one that funds. But even on capacity, right, we argue to you that they don't have the capacity because the kind of discourse that they have is something that is not good enough to create the change. And this is where the conversation of what discourse looks like starts. First off, the discourse is going to be outside. All oppressors, if they are actually bad as we all see, consistently always know that there's a possibility of pushback. So before you even create the pushback, they already tell people that don't listen to anything else anyone has to say about our religion. Don't watch the TV. The smartphone is evil. Modernization is bad. Therefore, zone out of all of these things. They're going to listen to them because they're going to say things that is going to be in opposition to your ideology. What this then means in most instances is that they create a firewall around these people, which makes it impossible for you, who is outside, to be able to engage these people. So one, the discourse that is happening is outside. Two, the discourse is not of good quality because you've already engaged that these particular people are just saying things like, don't wear a hijab. They probably don't even know the part of the Quran or the part of the rules and regulations of that particular religion that prescribe these particular things. It's just a lot of screaming, as they say, call out culture. People just responding on Twitter with their angry tonation, telling you this is wrong, you are bad, etc. Right? But moving on to other things in this particular debate. Recognize, they say, if you go after these religious leaders, they'll respond. They don't need to come and respond to you on social media because these people that you're talking about, who you are trying to save, are not even on social media because it is evil. I'm not sure how they are going to get these particular changes. Moving on,
So, we prove from OO why calling culture does not work, and the internal feminists that exist need external support.
They need external support. That is not something that can't exist in our world. You can fund them without discussing these particular issues. I keep on telling you this. Calling culture still works. We're already giving you the mechanisms why it works. I'm not sure what your case is in this debate, right? But what it tells you something that makes the GAF case possible. Because all these cases sounds as if these particular people who are feminists in these religions don't exist, and probably they don't even recognize what is going on. We tell you that the only way you can create any change is for these particular individuals in these particular religions to have issues with these things to begin with. The reason why this is true is because of the bad characterization we get from the entire bench. One, that at the end of this debate, feminists have to call out everything. That is false. Feminists don't have infinite amounts of resources and time. The only way your issue becomes part of the broader feminism conversation is the ability for you to have people in that feminist movement who equally want to push that specific goal. What that then means is that the only way feminists will be talking about these things to begin with is because there are other feminists from those religions who are in these feminist groups actively pushing for these particular individuals to talk about these things. You can't have a debate where there's no feminism on our end and these people don't have any feminism, right? But then also recognize CEO's case. Really upset. For an ESL final, this is the most Western mechanized case I've ever heard. That there are journalists and then there are media people who are going to talk. I'm not quite sure why, because blogs exist, people are automatically going to read them. But recognize, Christianity, all of these religions have alternative media. They have their own TV stations. They have their own blogs. These people are actively reading them. I'm not quite sure why they are obviously going to flip. But this particular case and mechanism does not engage the most vulnerable people, who are the people who are not in the Western world, who have been indoctrinated. Recognize, these Western people have laws, a liberal environment that already stimulates conversations. Their case does not actually achieve anything at the end of this debate. I don't understand how their mechanism directly leads to change. Closing government wins this debate.
Thank you for a great speech. We'd like to welcome the opposition whip. Here.
Okay, I hope I'm audible, at least I hear myself. So about the Sophie stuff, firstly, I'd like to thank everyone from Zagreb, Bulgaria that are cheering for us each and every moment. It's made this pressure a lot easier, and to be very Sophie, I want to thank Petra. I think we had a great experience and it was lovely to meet you more, even as a person, regardless of debate. And lastly, Tim, you're the best judge, coach, friend, and debater a person can have. So thank you, this is your win as well. Okay, let me set up a timer. Okay, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. So, firstly, structure is very simple. Firstly, engaging with opening government, then closing government, weighing with opening opposition. So let's start with opening government. Firstly, on agency, and do women actually want to hear this? Do they want to be critiqued? And do they want to escape from this system? I think this is necessarily true. Why? Firstly, note, you're from a conservative religion, meaning you probably don't even know about the alternative. I think this is likely simply because you grew up and your parents told you this is the only thing. They've been very protective. Secondly, because you usually choose people from a similar background as you, meaning that your social circle usually doesn't let you even interact with the alternative, meaning that you're not aware. I think this is important to the extent that in order to make a decision, you need to have the information about the alternative. This answers Marina's POI to a very large extent, because we actually show why probably your social circle will never actually tell you that this is oppression. Your social circle will never actually tell you. Note, the only thing you have known for your entire life is when you go to a fancy venue that you have to wear makeup. They might not let you in if you don't wear high heels. This is how this actually looks like and why it's important to inform them. But note, secondly, these women, even if they are aware, they don't even try to escape from this. And this is exclusively proven by Petra, by talking about learned helplessness, on why people don't usually leave a toxic relationship, because you fear about the alternative. Is somebody going to protect me? Do I have anyone on my side? If I leave my toxic boyfriend, am I going to find another one? And so on. I think we can solve this exclusively on our side, because critiquing these things is the first step in order to get funding later on, in order to actually have these women and tell them, okay, you can do without this, meaning you're exclusively getting this alternative for the women to feel safe and protected at the point where the feminist movement is aware of this problem and is actively fighting it. That's why we win on this. Secondly, on messaging. So they say that pretty much this is going to look bad to women. I think CG kind of repeats this, but note, it's very unlikely Peter proves this. But note the very important weighing here. Even if this isn't, even if they're right and the messaging is terrible, done terribly, note we sidestep this analysis because we actually show how we actually pressure religious authorities, meaning we're not contingent on proving that this is that women are going to buy into our narrative. This completely destroys opening government and closing government and mechanizes opening opposition, and that's why we win. I think at that point it's very easy and clear on why we take over OG. Now moving to closing government and what here happens. I think it's very unfortunate that they didn't engage to our concrete analysis, and this is where I'll be proving how we can co-opt most of their benefits. So firstly, they say that feminists are alien to you and this and so on. I think this is untrue because they're not idiots. Not how do you cater to someone. I pretty much had a similar situation. You're very likely to show that this can happen and that pretty much women have been oppressed. But secondly, note there are people from the same religion within the feminist movement that don't consent to these norms, meaning they can show how they differ from you exclusively, and this is when you're more likely to buy into, because you talk with a feminist that doesn't wear a burqa but is Islamic, you don't attack the religion, and then you're more likely to see on why this is going to happen and why you're not the subject to this. Secondly, their claim is that religious leaders won't call this like pretty much, that they will call this a cardinal sin and that you will pretty much feel bad about this. I think this is untrue, and I think our extension actually engages with this. How does it engage? Firstly, because political power is deeply tied in a lot of states with religious power, meaning at the point where you're receiving a ton of critique as a religious leader, your political stance is as well pressured. At that point, you're more likely to pretty much soften up in order not to lose this because it is your priority. At that point, it is untrue. But secondly, note what the Zagreb girls told me from the previous final, or pretty much taught me, is that pretty much religion is kind of like not very clear, meaning that religious narratives and texts can be heavily interpreted and adapted in order to pretty much fit in this story. Petar literally gives you an example there, meaning that it's probably not going to be even sold as contrary to a religion, meaning that they have their internal mechanism on to show like why maybe the Bible doesn't say that necessarily gay people go to hell and so on, meaning you can interpret this, meaning it's very likely that you can still buy that message. Before waiting, I'll take Marina, sure.
Just courts, religious freedom, etc. are not the critique of specific practices, but calls for human rights abroad. Look at Iran, it was started by Muslim women who wanted these rights.
Note, it pretty much does by the very motion and like the info slide and the example show why we critique these exact points. You don't need to critique complete religion because you have people of the same religion within the feminist movement that don't subject to these norms. We don't attack it. I've already proven this. Okay, and lastly, to co-opt Islamic feminism, we need the Western feminism for the initial push. We need them to put this as a story. We need them to give them the safe space to talk to men. This beats closing government because they said that these women only need to stand up, but we prove that you need pretty much the West and pretty much this in order for them to stand up. Lastly, moving on weighing with opening opposition. So firstly, I think we win out this debate because we prove exclusivity, because there is no alternative for these women to find these things out, and that pretty much they're subject to just to these norms on both sides. Only on our side, they can actually get this. Secondly, we win compared to opening opposition because our case is far more robust to the attacks coming from both governments on how women may not even want this. At the point where we prove that women are not aware necessarily that this is oppression, and secondly that we prove on why they're unlikely to pretty much, even if they are oppressed, to leave this form of oppression. At that point we can actually beat out these sides. And finally, on agency, I think we prove why it's more likely you're going to be fulfilled fulfilling or going to find your subjective form of happiness at the point where you have all the information and at the point where these women have the choice to opt out. It's an easy Zagreb win.